call on Aaron Klassen, Committee Clerk, to conduct the roll call.
Regional Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Craig.
Here.
Councillor Deutschmann.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Chair Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hunick.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Liggett.
Present.
Councillor McCabe.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Salonen. Present. Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Present.
Councillor Williams.
Present.
And Councillor Wolf.
Present.
Thank you.
I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. I would like to ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, we will now proceed with the delegations as listed on the agenda. Today's delegations will be participating both in person and virtually. I would like to remind the delegation of some guidelines for participation. When called upon, please feel free to make your way to the podium or turn your video on. We also ask that you be seated or turn your video off once your issue has been addressed. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in the immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, and others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations: please do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. With that, I'd like to call on Martin and Jane. You have 5 minutes to speak. Welcome to our committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Pastor Marty Levesque. I'm from All Saints Anglican Church in Waterloo, and I want to thank the committee for meeting with our delegation today. And we're excited to bring before you this project for your consideration. All Saints has already broken ground on a redevelopment of our property, and this is an active project. And I'd like to take a moment to just describe it quickly for you. In 2021, after a decade-long reorganization involving many courageous conversations with parishioners and community partners, All Saints sold a portion of its church property. The decision allowed us to relocate the church and pave the way for a community-serving community center. The center will surround our new worship space, and it will include state-of-the-art inclusive facility, blending recreational amenities, an industrial community kitchen, multi-purpose meeting rooms, and enabling a wide range of diverse programs, social services, and events to be delivered locally. The facility will include space for community partners such as Lutherwood's Children's Mental Health, the Region of Waterloo's Food Bank, Sunnydale Community Center and House of Friendship, and Horizon Family and Community Services to deliver their services locally to citizens. This significant and much-needed investment in North Waterloo will support the physical, mental, and spiritual wellness of the citizens of Waterloo. All citizens will be invited to benefit from our programs and services offered at the community center, regardless of their religious background, affiliation, or belief. The community center will be accessible and open to everyone in the region and will have a strong social equity lens in how it operates. The why now, though, is Waterloo needs community center spaces. City of Waterloo does not build or maintain any place-based community centers that offer capacity for program delivery within the city. Not-for-profit organizations like All Saints fill this gap. Waterloo also needs free gym space to provide access to physical activities, recreation for all. All existing gym space in Waterloo currently is pay to play. There is nothing free. The All Saints Community Center will provide free gym space and physical activity and recreation programs for all age groups. Waterloo also needs access to mental health and well-being programs and services. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken its toll on people's mental health and well-being of children, parents, and families and adults. People across Ontario are seeking mental health services more now than ever, and the All Saints Community Center will make services more accessible to community members by providing space to other not-for-profits to deliver their services, again, locally. We anticipate that over 10,000 community members will access the community center every year for a diverse set of activities such as gym nights, newcomer cooking classes, seniors groups, youth programs, and many other social determinants of health. To start, we have 5 community organizations joining with us to deliver on these social services, and we're in consultation with other community organizations like Adventure for Change and AFRO, the African Family Revival Organization. In conclusion, this valuable piece of infrastructure will be a catalyst for bringing social services under one roof in North Waterloo. This will benefit citizens, fellow nonprofit organizations, the city, and the region. What we are asking for is a partnership, and for staff to consider not the reimbursement of our development fees, we understand that's not possible, but to look at that number as a number that possibly from another pot of funds that the region could help us help with this project, and to continue to support the citizens of Waterloo.
Good afternoon, Chair Harris and Councillor. I think you know I'm Jane Mitchell. I'm president of the Lakeshore South Community Association, and I've lived in Lakeshore for over 40 years, and I'm a retired regional councillor. Presently, the region waives the development fees for various housing projects. In the past, the region has waived development fees in the downtown cores of Kitchener and Cambridge, and Waterloo did not have their fees waived for the same length of time for reasons that some of you know. The community center is being built on a site that already has sewer, roads, and other infrastructure. I've already paid to have a pad put in for the number 9 bus stop. It is true that churches do not pay property taxes, but other charities and nonprofits also have property taxes waived. Presently, the church that is being replaced does not have a community center, though we rent to various community groups for free. We saw the need in the community, and like other charitable organizations, we stepped up. I know you cannot legally waive development fees for a community center. You would have to create a new bylaw, and even that may not be possible. In the past, Regional Council has found money in other areas of the budget for worthy projects. What we are asking for is a drop in the bucket for a large government body like the region. Please ask staff to find the funds to waive our development fees. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin and Jane. Councillor McCabe.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just want to thank you both very much, and as well the associate pastor who's joined us as well. And thank you. I can absolutely attest that they have provided amazing services, not only to their faith group in Waterloo, but through the partnerships they have with particularly youth at risk in Waterloo and to some low-income communities. So thank you very much for that and for undertaking such a unusual project. I mean, it's not your normal sort of business that the church is doing, but no, we appreciate that you're stepping into what's a real need in Waterloo. So thank you for that. Just a couple questions around if you could speak to, the developers, what the developers done in turn or going to. How are the development charge credits going to work in this project?
So when we severed and sold a two-thirds portion of the property, which was at 400 Northfield Drive West, we had 3 acres. We severed two-thirds of it. The current church exists on that portion that we severed. It was purchased by the developer, and the developer will get the development credits for the demolition of that when they seek to build their housing on that. And they will probably look, I believe they break ground in the spring on that side of the project. Our side of the project, the developer's been very, a great sale price on the property, which has allowed us to put up more than 85% of the capital for this project. And we've invested, we've invested everything we have in delivering this. But the developer is also, we've had to leave the site and go to a temporary location. They've given us a great location at a reduced rent. They've been very helpful to get us through this phase of the project and back into the church and into the community center.
Thank you. And could you describe a little bit in a bit more detail the types of programs and how you kind of reconcile the fact that some of these services are, if not like within, like they're attached to a place of worship versus, some of the communities that you'll be welcoming in, how you reconcile their own faith groups, their own faith or lack of faith, that the people using it may have versus the approach your church is going to take to the.
So in our community consultations, we intentionally reached out to the broader neighborhood, did lots of interviews with our neighbors, but also with fellow organizations that could make use of the space, and that influenced our design. So even the design of the church itself, there's dark brick, which represents the sanctuary, but then there's light brick, which represents the community center space. And 25% of the church is reserved for the church. 25% of the building is reserved for the church. That's sanctuary and admin area. 12,000 square feet is reserved for the community center. So we intentionally want to make it, it's not separate. I mean, it's obviously one building, right? And so, but it does bring it together under one roof. Some of the programs we're looking to deliver, simple things like an open gym night every Friday night. And Lutherwood Mental Health wants to bring their children over. Sunnydale Community Center wants to bring their youth over. The youth of the area are clamoring for this because they have nowhere to go on a Saturday night or a Friday night because there are no community center spaces, no gathering spaces at all in Lakeshore North or Lakeshore South.
And I should add, too, that when we're dealing with Sunnydale and Adventure for Change, a lot of the people there, because I've worked with them for many years, are Muslim, and they have no problem with using the space, and certainly there won't be any, as far as I know, no crosses or anything like that in the community space, so they can just use it for whatever they need.
Right.
And just to add to that quickly, reflective in that design is our design choices. Like even the main walkway in is going to be painted orange with white feathers. It's our reconciliation walk. The plants of the gardening in the front is going to be the 4 medicines of our First Nations. The north sidewalk, the north walkway is a pride walkway. We're intentionally making sure that we're creating a visual story to tell that everyone here is welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification, and particularly around the delineation of the sacred space and the recreation space. It is true, unfortunately, to say that there aren't any free places for youth to gain or indoor spaces to gain recreation spaces in Waterloo. So I really appreciate the thought and the community collaboration and consultation you've done to bring this project forward. So thank you very much.
Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, what is the amount of the development charges that are being sought to be waived?
So the total development charges is $400,000. The region's portion of that is roughly $230,000.
And
the other portion is the city's portion.
Okay, and you're making a request to the city as well?
Yes, we've been in consultation with the city. The city is being quite supportive. They're looking at their community reserve fund as a means by which to help us.
Okay, and I was just curious, maybe staff could comment. Would this organization be the type of organization to be eligible for funding through the various funds that we just advanced to various organizations, the upstream funding and the multicultural funding that was just done recently?
Perhaps Mr. Sweeney?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. The short answer is I'm not sure, given the significant investments we've just made, but we can certainly take that under consideration.
If they are, if you could advance some information to them about that so that they could consider that as if they get no other relief, as an option to consider for next year. Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Councillor Deutschman asked 2 of my questions. It's a great project. I had the opportunity to come and see it, and I think you've proceeded in a really thoughtful way. We don't fund recreation centers, so I'm really glad to hear that you've gone to the City of Waterloo. So can you, when we defer or grant in lieu of development charges, as you're obviously aware, it comes from another pocket. And there may be other pockets at the region that we could look into, but can you talk a little bit about why you think it's appropriate to come to the region when we don't do recreation? Where's the intersection between what the region provides and what the recreation center will provide?
So the recreation center, I mean, obviously, the community center aspect provides a lot of community spaces for local groups. But it's more, for the region, I think the intersection comes with the fellow not-for-profits that we are going to be working with, giving them space to deliver social services. I'm sure you are aware, I'm not sure what in Waterloo, but I remember in London, at a previous parish I served, 70% of social services in London, Ontario are delivered by faith-based groups. And I'm sure that's a similar mark in the region of Waterloo. And we are creating a center, a hub of nonprofits to deliver those social services and the social determinants of health to the residents of Waterloo. The simple fact is the region of Waterloo Food Bank has a hole in Lakeshore North where there's not a food distribution center. There are 50 families up there who have to somehow make their way to a food bank location. And so this will open up a food bank location for those residents. It's the same for the delivery of Horizon Family and Community Services and Lutherwood Mental Health, Children's Mental Health, is to deliver services in neighborhood so that people do not have to travel, and that lowers that barrier and that ability to access those services. So this community center will become a hub of nonprofit activity and deliver of social services.
And also, the region has the family outreach workers that go to community centers, and Waterloo does not have many of those family outreach workers because we don't have very many community centers. So I think there's only like 3 family outreach workers in Waterloo, and of course, when you look at Kitchener and you look at Cambridge, there's a lot more family outreach workers, and those particular people connect families to various services. And Lakeshore certainly has refugees, immigrants, and families in need, just like other neighborhoods.
So, Chair Harris, when it's appropriate, I think I would ask that this be deferred to staff to examine if there is another way of funding this now that we know what the quantum is, and if that could come back at some point to council.
Sounds good. We have one more question on the board right now. Councillor McCabe, a follow-up.
Awkward. Thank you very much. And Chair Redmond asked a couple of the questions that I was going to ask, but just wanted to say that partly, I guess, in response to Chair Redmond's question is that some of the work you're doing really, I mean, this work that you're talking about really is that upstream work, and there are a lot of new Canadians in that area or within that catchment area. So I just also wondered, because I know there's a bit of a distance between like the one area of need, Sunnydale and Cedar Brae, over to where this center is being built. How are you suggesting that they may get back and forth?
Well, there's the same bus route that drops off like at Adventure for Change or at Sunnydale drops off right in front of the community center. And it is a little bit of a walk, but it's not that far of a walk. We are looking at different, with House of Friendship is whether or not we would do transportation, so like just a van delivery. And one of the main programs we're looking to launch with House of Friendship is batch cooking classes for new Canadians, bringing diaspora communities together so that they have that ability to connect with one another and build community and you know, that those type of interconnected, how communities raise each other up. And so we're looking to provide the space just to be able to do that, just to create that sense of belonging for all these new Canadians.
And I should mention too, with Sunnydale, the community center is quite small. It is one of the, and thanks to the region a few years ago, did have one of the townhouses become the community center, but frankly, the need is way greater than great long lines on food distribution day. That's all I can say. And also Adventure for Change, which I don't know if you know about Adventure for Change, but they're an amazing group. They have had free, at the Parkdale Plaza, they've had free rent for a while, but that has finished. And so they are either looking for a new place or looking for money, and they're certainly a group that we would like to help as well. They help with youth that, you know, are in need or need homework help or ideas, and then they have also classes for refugee parents and things, sewing and so on. They're a really fantastic organization, and I'd hate to see them go down because
Right.
of lack of money.
Yeah, yeah. There definitely is a need there, and I think it's a generous description to call the townhouse a community center, but we do
Yeah.
appreciate
Hey.
that the region has had that there for a number of years. And so, yeah, thank you again for the work that you're doing in that community and the thought that you've put into this project around the design, but also the people that you're working with to serve. So I really appreciate that, and happy to second the motion at the appropriate time.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if when that goes back to staff, if we could also get an update on how many other worship centers are looking for deferment, because I know the Hindu Temple in Cambridge has $500,000 in development fees that they would like to have forgone as well. So if that could be part of the information. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll go to staff. I don't know if there's a motion that's required. Obviously, there's some direction given as to what the timing might be like to come back with something for council on this particular matter.
Yes, excuse me, through you, Mr. Chair. I would say that staff would likely be in a position to be able to report back at some point during the 2023 budget process, so a very early part of next year.
Is that satisfactory? Yep, sounds good. Any other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
I'd like to move now to the consent agenda. If you wish to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless items are requested to be moved to the regular agenda. The items listed on the consent agenda will be dealt with in one motion. Are there any items that you wish to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, do we have a mover and a seconder to approve the consent reports under item 6.1? Moved by Councillor Craig, seconded by Councillor Foxton. Please use the yes or no button to vote. And that is carried. I would like to call on Craig Dyer, Commissioner of Corporate Services, to provide a presentation on our next agenda item.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On your agenda today is a report on the recently passed Bill 23, the Building More Homes Faster Act. And I have a short presentation that I've put together to describe the key features of the report. I can assure members of committee that there's nothing in the presentation that isn't in the report. So I'm just going to repackage it a little bit and talk a little bit about key messages and walk you through what we really should be describing as the preliminary financial impacts, because as you'll see as we go through the brief slide deck, there's a whole bunch of more work that will still need to be done to finalize the numbers. Next slide, please. So I tried on this slide to try to explain at a very high level what's happening with this bill. And the first 2 points here I think you'll recognize from the orientation sessions that we gathered for back in November. And the first is that municipalities have a very, very small list of revenue sources to fund our capital investments. And those are essentially property taxes, user rates, predominantly water and wastewater related, and development charges. So that's the first point. And then the second point is the balanced budget requirement. For every dollar that a municipality invests in infrastructure requires a source of funding. And so if one of those sources of funds is restricted or slowed in some way, in this case, development charges, then the burden will follow to the remaining sources. So on the assumption that the capital program and the infrastructure that's needed to serve the new development remains intact. If one source of revenue drops, then that falls to the other two to pick up that amount and ensure that the infrastructure gets put in place. So when we talk about Bill 23 having an impact on future property taxes on user rates, that's why. Next slide, please. So just very brief background. Bill 23 did receive royal assent on November 28th. Despite the public comment period remaining open until December 9th, and I understand that there are still municipalities and others that are providing input, that bill reduces development charges collected by municipalities. And we haven't had a chance to go through development charges in detail, but simply put, it's the primary source of funding for growth-related infrastructure. So as municipalities have to put in new water and wastewater infrastructure, new roads, new public transit buildings and vehicles, just to name a few, development charges are the primary revenue source we have to fund those investments. And so as that revenue then is reduced, and the reduction is in the form of mandatory phase-ins, mandatory exemptions, mandatory discounts, and other changes that have been made to the Act, municipalities are going to have to look at different ways of compensating for that, which could include delaying the construction of the infrastructure that's needed if the revenue reduction is significant, taking on potentially more long-term debt. So rather than funding a project right out of our development charge reserves, it may require more long-term borrowing, and then the increased property taxes and user rates for the reasons I described on the previous slide. Next slide, please. So some of the points that that staff have made in the body of the report, and that the regional and single tier treasurers have been working on in terms of our submission to the province, is that reducing municipal development charges will not result in more homes being built faster. And so if that's the intent of the bill, a reduction in the municipal development charges, we believe, is counterintuitive to that notion, and that, in fact, housing supply could, in fact, be slowed as infrastructure projects are potentially deferred due to restrictions on municipal cash flow. Ultimately, taxpayers will pay more for growth. I've heard it said many times that the Development Charges Act pre-Bill 23 ensured that growth pays for growth. That is not correct. There are a number of provisions within the DC Act prior to these ones that did not allow for growth to pay for growth, and that's in the form of ineligible costs, ineligible services, and a historical service level standard. So what we believe will happen ultimately is that the total cost of housing will increase as property taxes and user rates go up in the future. Next slide, please. It's been quite an exercise over the last 5 weeks to attempt to quantify the financial implications of this bill, and that's for a couple of reasons, largely due to implementation timing. So in the first case, there are different components of this bill, and certainly within Schedule 3, which amends the Development Charges Act, that come into effect at different times. So certain provisions come into effect upon royal assent. Some are retroactive to an earlier date. Some will need a regulation to be passed before we understand all the rules and can do the math. And then because this affects not the operating budget, but the long-term capital program, these impacts are going to be felt over a longer period of time. So it's very difficult for me to say to you, the passing of Bill 23 will result in an X% tax increase in 2023, because it just doesn't work that way with infrastructure that's being put in place over a longer period of time. And so from our suggestion, something for council to consider is to, and many municipalities are looking at doing this, would be to advocate to the province to keep municipalities whole as we go forward. Next slide, please. The work that we have done has focused on 4 specific components. The ones that we believe, A, are the most significant, B, are the ones that we're capable of being quantified at least approximately at this point. And those are the phase-in of new development charge rates. So the Act will now require a mandatory 5-year phase-in, starting with 80% of the maximum development charge. If that provision had been in place with our current bylaw, and with all the current bylaws of the cities and the townships as well within Waterloo Region, that would have resulted in approximately $80 million of less development charges collected over that period of time. I'm going to flip over to the two far right-hand columns, and this table is in the report. There are two provisions that remove certain costs from being development charge eligible. One is studies. We've estimated that is approximately $70 million over the next 10 years. And the removal of land, this one is a little bit less clear to us at this point, because we understand a regulation will be passed identifying which services land acquisition will no longer be DC eligible. We've estimated at this point that that's potentially up to $125 million over the next 10 years. And then the previous council had passed a motion directing staff to explore adding a housing services development charges into our next development charge bylaw. And with the most recent updates to the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan, we're estimating that we could have recovered approximately $260 million over the next 10 years with a housing development charge. That will no longer be possible, as housing has been removed as an eligible service. Next slide, please. And I'll conclude with just a couple of comments about development charge reserve funds, which have been in the news for the last little while. So first of all, the use of reserve funds is mandated under the Development Charges Act. We have to have them. And municipalities use these reserve funds to basically manage the flow of development charges collected, and when and how those development charges are used to fund capital. So as development happens and as development charges are paid, we place those funds into the reserves. There's one for each service. And then we draw on those reserves as capital costs are being incurred. The Development Charges Act in this particular component of it is highly prescriptive in terms of how development charge reserve funds are to be used. We report on them through our audited financial statements, the annual financial information return, and the Act prescribes an annual development charge transaction report, which will be coming your way in March of next year. And it's been suggested by some that development charge rates can be reduced without impacting property tax or water and wastewater rates because of these reserve funds. Next slide, please. And so to that, we would say that development charge reserve funds are used to pay for the debt servicing costs for all the debt that we've issued so far that's growth related, and to pay for new infrastructure as it's built. So pulling a few regional numbers, the region at the end of last year had a development charge reserve fund of $85 million. And of that $85 million, $58 million was cash and $27 million was in the form of future development charge receivables, because the Act was amended a year or two ago that requires certain development charges to be paid in installments in the future. But the accounting rules require us to show that funding in our reserve, and then we show how much is cash and how much is a receivable. So that's $85 million, $58 million was cash. To date, we have $327 million of growth-related debt outstanding. And to service that debt will take $27 or $28 million next year. So half of the cash balance at the end of last year will go towards paying debt servicing costs in the following year. And then our overall 10-year capital program requires development charge funding of over $1.2 billion. So a reserve of $85 million compared to $327 million of debt outstanding and another $1.2 billion of DCs required in the future, seems like a relatively small balance in that reserve, certainly from my perspective. Next slide, please. And we're coming to the end. And so the balance in those reserves will fluctuate from year to year. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. Everything from the pace of development and the timing of capital costs, which are estimated when the rates are calculated, but always happen at a different time and at a different quantum than originally anticipated. There are circumstances where the capital costs happen well before the development takes place. Water and wastewater infrastructure, for example, are need to be there and in the ground, and the treatment facilities have to be ready in order for development to occur. And so many municipalities then issue debt and fund the debt servicing costs from future development charges, and in some cases run a negative balance in those reserves. There's also situations where a municipality will collect development charges over a period of time and then invest it in infrastructure, for example, an arena or a community center or a library or something like that, once there's sufficient funding available. And then there are certain circumstances where there's a temporary increase in the volume of building permits issued, and that can result in a temporary increase in the balance in a reserve fund. So a very important part of how we manage our long-term financial sustainability is the use of these development charge reserve funds. And then to close, Mr. Chair, just a couple of concluding comments. The first is development charges, as I've already indicated, they're used to fund the infrastructure that's needed to support the housing that needs to be built. And so if the intention is for 1.5 million housing units to be built over the next 10 years, infrastructure needs to be in place to support that housing. Reducing development charge revenue is going to require additional funding over time in the future from property taxes and user rates, and may result in delays in infrastructure investments or additional issuance of regional debt. And then the region's development charge reserve funds, I would say, are relatively modest when you compare them to the amount of debt we have outstanding and the amount of development charges that will be needed to support growth over the next 10 years. I hope that's helpful, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Councillor James, question.
Question for clarification. When do I introduce an amendment to the staff report for the motion?
We do have folks on the roster for questions, so I don't know if you want to go through those, and then I'll come back to you to add that amendment.
Okay,
we'll
perfect.
Go from there. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. We've all heard in the media, and I think all area municipalities in the region included got a letter saying from the minister that they were going to keep municipalities whole as we go through this exercise. And I guess we acknowledge there's one wallet, there's one taxpayer, whether it's coming from municipal funds or provincial funds. But I guess the question that I would ask for you to Mr. Dyer, and if you can't answer it now, Craig, I certainly understand, but what are the questions that we want the provincial government to answer to clarify what they mean by keeping us whole?
Yes, through Mr. Chair, it's a very good question, one that I may have a better answer for in the next week or so after a conversation with some of my colleagues later this week. I think the challenge for us is going to be, for a municipality to be made whole will require the tracking and recording of multiple transactions. Bill 23 has amended the Development Charges Act in a number of different ways. And so we would certainly have to put a mechanism together to be able to track the impact of mandatory phase-in, the impact of discounts on certain types of residential buildings. I'm not sure how we'll deal with, for example, the removal of housing as a service, and how that is going to impact future investments by municipalities in affordable housing, and how that will result in municipalities being made whole. I think there's many, let's say, implementation questions that I think we would have to try to ascertain, how likely it is that that will happen.
And if I could, one second question. There seems to have been a bit of a war of words over reserve funds, and you've done a really excellent job of sort of giving us the parameters of what reserve funds are, why they're there, the legislation around them, and what they're used for. Do we need to clarify that with the provincial government, or do you think that misunderstanding has been rectified?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's something that requires further conversation with the province. I don't know that. I don't know yet that the misconceptions around municipal reserves and reserve funds have been clarified. So I think there is absolutely some more work to do there.
Thank you.
Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Dyer, just have a question, but just wanted to follow up on Chair Edmonds' comment. Is it DC reserves or reserves in general that there's some misconception or misinformation that's been floating around in the ether?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's been a little bit of both. There were certainly some specific comments made about the development charge reserve funds and the balances in those funds. If I recall the recent correspondence from the province, I believe that there was mention that the audit that they're contemplating was going to cover both development charge reserve funds and other reserves or reserve funds. So it's probably broader, but I think there's some specific misconceptions about development charge reserve funds in particular that I think we can definitely work to try to dispel.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the provincial government is seeking to bring out this audit card with respect to municipalities once we're raising the concerns about the impact of Bill 23 on our own finances. Is this something that we should be planning for in this budget with respect to the potential shortfall in terms of a line item or something that we will have to add for additional infrastructure investment in the future? Perhaps because we're losing the DC charge money in the future for infrastructure investment?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not convinced it's a specific line item in the 2023 budget. I think it's something that will actually start to play out more so as we get into 2024 and 2025. And part of the reason for that, at least here at the region, is our bylaw right now has a July 31st, 2024 expiry date. And so we'll need to make some decisions around the next development charge bylaw. This will be in about a year from now, putting a new bylaw into place. And I think at that point, we'll start to get a much better understanding after we've gone through all of the analysis on the projects, on the extent to which they can be recovered from DCs. We'll be in a much better position to communicate the impacts, and we'll see that play out then over the next 10, 20, and 30 years.
And Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, with respect to DCs, I mean, when would you have to start retaining consultants or what have you to do the review for when the current DC bylaw expires and we have to implement the new?
Yep, so we're in the process of doing that right now.
Right now, yeah, okay.
Councillor McCabe.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Or through you, Chair. Sorry. Thanks very much for the presentation, Craig. We also already have infrastructure deficit as well. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on how much, and maybe remind us how much of an infrastructure deficit we already have versus what this additional impact will be.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, so we're in the process of updating our numbers and hope to bring something specific back either through the budget process or in the early part of next year. If I recall correctly, the last time that we estimated the shortfall in terms of annual funding for what we call asset renewal, right, which is looking after everything we already have on and in the ground right now, was somewhere in the $25 to $35 million a year range. But we'll be able to get a better number for you in the early part of next year. And I think this is one of the big challenges with this bill is that if development charges aren't sufficient to cover the growth-related costs, then municipalities, I think, are going to be in this awkward situation of having to make decisions between the allocation of funds to look after what we have in and on the ground versus the construction of new infrastructure to support growth. And that's the real challenge. I think, certainly the region, municipalities in general have made great progress on asset management plans and policies over the last several years. But most are in a infrastructure deficit of some type to some level, and I think it's going to make it even harder to bridge that gap.
So if I could paraphrase, I think part of what you're saying is that this bill will actually not help us build anything. Particularly, it may actually slow down and not actually help anyone reach the goal, the shared goal of the 1.5 million houses. Would that be correct?
I think that's one of the potential outcomes, yes, that the infrastructure, that housing supply will not be accelerated, but in fact it could potentially slow down if the infrastructure is not in place to support it.
Thank you. And if I may, just one other, question. So I know we're talking about the financial impacts of Bill 23, but I don't want to lose sight of the broader impacts of Bill 23 as well, like the environmental, particularly some of the environmental impacts. If I worry that if the province does come back and or respond to what they mean by make us whole, that will be strictly a numbers game, right? When in fact, this bill is touching much more broadly than, I don't want to say just the money, because development charges are critically important, as you've outlined, but this is going to have other far-ranging impacts on our parklands, on our, as a lower-tier municipality, the ability to build recreation facilities, similar to what the delegation was just talking about, but also to build in climate change adaptation and mitigation that we need. So I don't know if you have any comment on those, anyone has comments on those kind of impacts, but I don't want to lose sight of, I don't want to just focus solely on the money, strictly around development charges, if that's possible.
Thank you. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I need you to correct me, Craig, but I thought, our development charges aren't due for revision until 2024. Is that what you said? July?
Yes, July 31st, 2024 is the expiry date of our current bylaw.
So is our current bylaw in effect until that date, and then this new development charge program takes place?
So the current development charge bylaw, as I understand it, remains in effect. One of the provisions that we're looking at and trying to better understand is pre-Bill 23, there was a maximum 5-year term for a development charge bylaw in the Development Charges Act. That maximum term has now been extended to 10 years. And so one of the things we're working through and trying to better understand is what does that mean for our existing bylaw? And does it mean that our bylaw, despite it having a July 31st, 24 expiry date, that it can live for actually 5 years beyond that? Or is it just for future or new bylaws that come into effect? So we're looking at that. We should have that sorted out relatively soon, and we'll report back to council in due course.
Thank you, and I wanted to bring that up to not to say, look at guys, we've got time, because we do, but if we're going to advocate, we advocate now, and we work at it and show them consistently as we go forward with the 100% development charges until the other July date of 2024 or 10 years out, which would be even wonderful, but I don't know if the province would allow that. So, Chair Edmund, I do agree with you that we should immediately put these numbers together and justify them. I'm sure that the province doesn't plan on zero money and decide to build things. Right? They've got a lot of infrastructure of their own going on, and they must have money somewhere, and I bet they got a heck of a lot more reserves than we do. So I think that we need to point out that this is not money we're sitting on. This is the survival of municipalities. And I think definitely we should go to the province. But we also have to remember the new development charge does not affect, some municipalities do have a date that's due in 2022-23 that they will be in more risk. But also my township has an extended date. So we'll get 100% in the next year and a half, 2 years. And if the 10 years works, Greg, hallelujah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Huinig.
Through you, Chair Harris. Thank you, Councillor Foxton, for pointing out the timeline of the bill and the repercussions for that. I think that's really important to think about. And Mr. Dyer, I'm just wondering, would there be value if down the line we're forced to carry out Bill 23 and we thereby lose development charges? Is it worth tracking the percentage that we're losing and the dollar value and essentially proposing to the provincial government that they then reimburse us for those funds in honor of keeping the municipality whole? And just before I conclude my question/comments, I just want to thank Councillor McKay for also pointing out the vital environmental impacts of this bill as well. Thanks.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, it's a very good point, and something that we're actively discussing right now is what is the report, or what are the reporting mechanisms that we need to put in place immediately, because this bill has now received royal assent. What are some of those reporting mechanisms that we need to put in place in order to track the actual impact of some of these changes? So we'll keep working on that, and we can certainly update council as our work continues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Erb.
Thanks, Chair Harris, and thanks for this report, Mr. Dyer, and to your staff. And it's so unfortunate that all of the work that you could be doing for the good of the region, you have to put aside and respond to this kind of pressure. But I guess that goes with the territory. Anyway, a couple of years ago, the development charges were phased in over a number of years with new provincial legislation, where they according to permit, to shovel on the ground, a few things like that. Does that phase in coincide with when they expire in 24 as well, or how does that phase in work in this? Am I making myself clear, or it looks a little inquisitive on your face?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the phase in to which you're referring. Are you thinking about was it the delayed payments?
Yeah, delayed. Sorry.
Right. So. Yeah, so those changes were made a couple of years ago. If I have it right, I believe in a couple of cases where there were delayed payment arrangements, there are now outright exemptions. So in some cases where there was, for example, a 20-year payment, or sorry, a 21 payment plan starting with occupancy and then every year for the next 20 years, in certain situations for I'll say affordable and attainable housing that meets the definition in the Act, that in some cases that will actually be exempt from development charges. So one of the outcomes of this is that we may have fewer deferred payment arrangements. That being said, there have been numerous circumstances where the developer was actually not interested in a 6 or a 21 payment plan. And notwithstanding the requirements of the bill, they paid their development charges up front. So that was a preference that they had. And so that's, again, one of the things that we'll look to need to manage and report on as we implement the outcome of this bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Erb. Seeing no other questions, I'd like to go back to Councillor James. You have an amendment to introduce?
Yeah, I think Julie is going to put my motion on the screen. I would like to introduce a motion regarding Bill 23 to go to the province, area municipalities, federal MPs as well. Seeing the clear outcry from the community, from other municipalities, and hearing even recently today by Councillor Foxton as well, that need to really advocate to the province. That's not the right one. No.
If we can put that up, and perhaps we'll read that
Yeah,
motion.
you would have received it. There's some slight, that's okay. the clear impact that this bill is going to have on the region and area municipalities, I think we need to be advocating, and we need to be very clear on the negative impact this has over the years and with taxpayers, but even within our own institution.
Just want to give everyone the due time to have a read over this, if there are any questions. Sure, it's been moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Erb. Does anybody would like any more time on this one? We can pop up the yes or no buttons to vote, perhaps, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, Councillor Craig would like to speak to this. No, you go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the extent and the involvement Councillor James has gone to in putting this together for us. And I think it's something we all can support and certainly adequately defend publicly in terms of what the problems are. But the problems are much deeper than that in terms of our relationships, or the relationships that the province has, and how it sees municipalities, and how it doesn't register us as equal partners in the building of communities. Quite frankly, they look down upon us. They come in with legislation all the time. The Strong Mayors Act legislation, as an example, we didn't need that. What we needed was strong funding, and we haven't got that. And world-class cities, world-class communities have world-class financing, which we don't have. So these are all part and parcel of the problems that we're seeing. I'm really dealing with what I think is the unfairness of what's going on. And I'd like to bring council's attention to the City of Toronto that just got a handout of $230 million because Mayor Tory simply asked for it to help deal with their deficit problem, and how he's going now to the federal government to get more. And I think that's incredibly unfair of the ministry to do that. Also, within that announcement was the comments from Minister Clark that they would be looking at the shortfalls in DC funding, and if Toronto lived up to the housing, they in fact would probably be reimbursed in terms of their lack of DC funding. So I agree totally where Councillor James is going and what she's trying to do, but I think there has to be an add-on to this, maybe at a later date after we sort of really consider this. But I think our two MPPs should be asking for a third of our deficit to be restored. And I think that's where we ought to be going. And we need to point that out in terms of what's happening. But, you know, we are really at a point in history here of dealing with issues that are going to impact the taxpayer. I mean, we look at things across the region that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a homeless issue, an addiction issue, an inflationary budget, mental health, and now we have a facilitator coming down to help us be more efficient. I mean, the ministry has no idea of how municipalities function, in my opinion. And I think this is just part and parcel of it. So, Councillor James, I thank you for the motion. I certainly will support it. I'll be talking to our regional chair about how do we move forward to ask for 1/3 of our deficit to be restored, as has happened in the City of Toronto. City of Toronto that gets land transfer tax, had handouts for years. So I think we have to deal with that. I'd like to give the regional chair something to think about over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Craig.
We got to go.
Propose any other questions or comments on this proposed motion? I know that the voting buttons are up, but want to offer any opportunity, oh, they're not up, but offer any opportunity for further questions on this subject? We'll give it a minute and we'll put that voting button up.
I'm surprised nobody else is talking to it. Say something.
It is now up. And that is carried. Thank you. I would like to now call on Connie McDonald, Chief Communications and Strategy Officer, to introduce Jenny Smith, Director, Corporate Strategy and Performance, and the presentation. Connie.
Thank you so much, and through the chair, we are excited to be here today to talk through our next steps on the journey to a new strategic plan for the region of Waterloo. Today, we are seeking input and approval from committee on the broad approach and timelines so that we can begin moving the process forward in January. I'll now turn it over to Jenny Smith, our Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance, who will touch upon why this work is so important and how it's an incredible opportunity to continue building strong relationships across the organization and beyond as we build our plan for the future together. Jenny?
Thanks so much, Connie, and thank you, Chair and Committee. So if we go to the first slide, actually, please, that would be great. So with each new strategy comes a unique background story. And that story really is the why. You know, the fact that our strategy is almost up isn't a good enough reason to embark upon a new one. And I think right now our collective why is pretty clear. So the region is growing at an incredible pace. The community is facing many challenges and opportunities on numerous fronts, so social, environmental, economic and health fronts. And we really are at a critical point in time. And the weight of our decisions is apparent. And there are so many choices to make. You know, we have to ask ourselves, what will our future look like? How will we be resilient in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years? And really, how will we invest to make sure that we can reach all of our goals? Next slide, please. So I won't spend much time here. You've seen this before. This slide simply reminds us of what we're changing. So the strategic plan is central to how we do our work. And the annual plan and budget really puts it into action. So it's really the gas pedal. And they're incredibly important tools for change. Together, these really align every part of our organization. They dictate our service levels and actually calibrate multiple long-range master plans that we have that really do steward the change that we want to make. So next slide, please. So moving to objectives for this process. So I often say there's really no magic starting line for strategic planning. We're always building on work that's happened before and work that's already kind of in the hopper. But this is no reason not to challenge ourselves, to really and to look at changing the way that we do things in a proactive way. So I'm just going to highlight a couple. The first there is to explore and redefine our mission, vision and values. In almost 10 years since we've done that, and I think everybody would say that it's fair to say that change has happened. And this is really our beating heart as an organization, and now is a great time to check on those and make sure they're right and adjust them as we need to. The second is about setting strategic priorities that shape service levels and resourcing decisions. It's important to be strategic, but we've got to be practical too. We have to make some tough choices. It's also an opportunity to challenge ourselves and reflect on things that are moving all around us. If you take climate, for example, we know we've got important goals related to that. Are they the right ones? And are we on the right path to deliver on them? Other important things are around accountability and performance framework, so we can actually evaluate and track change. And the final ones are about building partnerships. This is a great opportunity for us to have a touch point with community and partners on where we're all going together. So on to the next slide. Here is a list of guiding principles. They're actually in your package, so I'm not going to speak to all of these, but they do speak to the important things that should guide us through this process. And they are things that we can keep coming back to make sure we're on the right track. And broadly, they speak to building focus, finding balance between existing and new things, seeking clarity of role together. And it also speaks about the importance of equity and building strong relationships and trust and how we do this work together. So it'll be important for us to keep checking back. And that's how we're designing the approach, is with these principles in mind. So the next slide, very quickly. Currently, we're crafting a fulsome community engagement plan based upon those principles, and we really aim to have a whole community approach that values diversity of representation across the region. We're trying to reach as many folks as possible and meet them where they're at. It's also an important opportunity for us to find space for the many partners. We don't work in a vacuum, so creating space for folks from academia, from business, not-for-profits, grassroots organisations will be really important. And one thing I do want to say is Central will be working with area municipalities, many of which are also doing important planning work themselves right now. We have to do this work together. So the report highlights a variety of tactics. Of paramount importance is including that they're all accessible and equity-based. A nice highlight is community connectors. So we'll actually be working with residents to undertake outreach for us and with us. And I think that creates a lot of trust in the process. We're also looking to build forums for ongoing dialogue and guidance throughout the process, like the Community Roundtable and Youth Advisory Group, which is actually based upon the successful work in the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And we'll also be looking at events and workshops, one-to-ones, small group meetings, as well as surveys, and drawing upon the many times the community have come to us and told us what's important to them. So we'll be bringing on those for sure. And finally, I will close out by just highlighting a number of timeline pieces. So if we'll go to the next slide, that would be great. And really what we're trying to do is to create the new strategy by July 2023. So this is a perfect timing to influence plan and budget. So we can align resources really quickly to some of the things that might be shifting. So the first half of the year will really feature engagement, research, scanning, workshops, everything that we need to do to build the plan. And post-July, we'll really focus on implementation and alignment with plan and budget, KPIs, identifying service levels and targets, and really just rolling on and continuing to implement over the course of the number of years and tracking and reporting as we go. So I'm going to stop there and thank you very much, and we'll be here for questions.
Do we have any questions of the presenters? Okay, thank you. Do we have, I believe there is a motion, recommended motion. Do we have a mover and seconder to approve the recommended motion? Moved by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Wolf. Please use your yes or no buttons to vote. And that is carried. Item number 8, information and correspondence. We'll have received that for information. Other business. The next item on the agenda is, in fact, my motion, a notice of motion. So I will step down from chairing and ask Chair Redmond to chair the remainder of the meeting. We'll take maybe a couple-minute break and proceed once we get set up. Thank you.
We've received a notice of motion from Councillor Harris that is listed on today's agenda. Councillor Harris, I have you down as a mover. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Moved by Councillor Nowak. Councillor Harris, would you like to speak to this motion?
Do you want me to read the motion?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'd like to move the motion, whereas the Council of the Regional Municipality of Waterloo deems it both appropriate and expedient to rescind and repeal a prior decision to extend post-service benefits to regional councillors, which was passed on November 8th, 2022. Therefore, be it resolved that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo hereby enacts as follows: that the decision be rescinded and that staff be directed not to proceed with the implementation of a post-service continuous benefit plan for council with the region's insured benefit carrier as described in the report as mentioned on November 8th, 2022. 2, that the extension of current benefits to past service councillors as described in the report on November 8th, 2022 be ended on December 31st, 22, and that staff be directed to prepare a terms of reference for a citizen advisory committee to study and provide recommendations to council regarding the remuneration and benefits for members of regional council, including an analysis of comparator jurisdictions to be presented to the Admin and Finance Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Nowak, do you want to speak to it as a seconder?
I think it's rather self-explanatory. I don't mind saying it again. I do regret the decision I made earlier on this one. And I think that this is probably the best way of addressing that error in judgment. So we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So we have a notice of motion that has been moved and seconded. Any comments? Councillor Craig.
Just very quickly, I appreciate the comments of my two colleagues and those that signed the letter, that sent a letter into us. I thought that was great. Secondly, just as a comment in terms of the Citizens Committee, I think we're obligated to focus on what's happening on the ground right now with regards to the budgets and so on. And I would see a committee such maybe be struck in not next year, but the year after or whatever, according to, I'll leave that with the chair again. Okay, I don't think that's an appropriate time right now.
Thank you. So you're suggesting that this committee be struck, but not necessarily immediately post-budget 2023?
Okay. Exactly. Okay.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Nowak.
Typically, when a committee like this is formed, they make recommendations, and they make recommendations for the next council.
Right.
So I don't think it matters when this is happening, as long as we understand that the recommendations, which would probably be approved by council, will be for the next council, not for this council.
The public will get confused. Let's make sure about that, okay? That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments? Councillor Solomon, please go ahead.
Councillor Nowak actually answered my question that I had, so.
Thank you. Councillor Deutschmann, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I note that there was a bylaw in place, 13-062, which covered the 2014 to 2018 period, which provided for annual increases and the establishment of a Citizens Advisory Committee during the third year of each council to conduct a review. So I'm wondering if there's a specific timeline in this memo, in this motion. And one of the problems I have is I can't pull up the full motion, unfortunately, on my e-scribe, so I only see parts of it. And I don't know if it could be put up on the big screen or, okay, thank you, Mr. Harris. So I'm just wondering if we can add in that this committee would be struck during the third year of our term. Is that a friendly amendment?
I would ask the mover and seconder.
Yeah, I think I'm open to that for sure, yep.
No, I have no problem with that.
Okay, so that will be time certain in year 3 of this mandate. Any further comments, Councillor
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing I'd like to add is previously we only looked at remuneration. And I just feel that now we're into this issue of looking at remuneration and benefits because of the unfortunate motion that was passed during the last term. And I would like to see if it would be a friendly amendment to remove benefits from it, because in the report that accompanied that previous motion, the report outlined that council which is, for the most of us, unlike you, Madam Chair, it's a part-time job. You're a full-time position, understood. But as a part-time position, we have access to exceptional benefits currently. And upon termination of our time here at the Shoehorn, we have the opportunity to purchase benefits continuing on. And I don't really see the need to examine benefits as part of this and just stick to remuneration. Would that be a friendly amendment?
So again, I would turn to the mover and seconder. Do you consider that a friendly amendment?
Yeah, I would concur that's likely fair. I don't know if the bylaw speaks to what that citizen committee or panel normally would do, or I guess the staff in this essence would bring a report back that would lay out the terms and reference for such a review. So I don't know if normally they would include that scope, maybe just a wording issue that we, delete some of those words, but we come into asking staff for a staff report back. I don't know if staff can comment on normally what's done here in this case.
So I don't know if any staff want to comment. We did have a report during the last council, and it did look that benefits were sometimes treated differently in other jurisdictions. Mr. Lochner.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Council, as was stated, currently gets benefits now. So for clarity for the committee, they may want to look at Council's current benefits, which is a distinctly different question than should Council receive benefits at post-service. So my advice would be to have the committee look at both of those and then make the decision when it comes back to Council. I think the restriction, I understand the point, but the restriction would limit the committee's ability to look at current benefits as well.
Yes, if I may, Chair, I would likely decline that friendly amendment simply because I would like staff to come back with a report that would outline that terms of reference, and I think it's important, should a committee be struck of citizens, that they would include the existing benefit package when they're making their analysis. I'm assuming that they would know what that is, but that be included so that if they were making decisions on remuneration, they would include the benefit that we already receive as a part of that package. So, I'll just end it there and I'll say not as of right now. Perhaps an amendment, or a motion for an amendment is fine, but yeah.
So, Madam
So
Chair.
Councillor Deutschmann, that is not seen as a friendly
Right.
amendment. Do you want to move the amendment?
Right. So I'll just point out that the prior bylaw was just a review of council compensation in that case. However, I'll remove that.
Well, what about striking remuneration and benefits and just putting compensation in?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Because if that's compensation is just a generic term to cover all, then
Well, we could leave the existing. I'll remove what I said, but I'll offer this other amendment, which I hope would be accepted as a friendly amendment, and is that the committee will not consider lifetime benefits as part of that review.
So again, I don't know that that's perceived as a friendly amendment. I will go to the mover and seconder, Councillor Harris.
yeah, I mean, I get where he's going with this, and I would support that in principle myself. However, I'll decline the friendly amendment here simply because I don't think politicians in this case, now that we've learned a lesson we have, should be really dictating the rules of what's in, what's out. Let this come back through a staff report into the terms of reference. Allow a truly citizens group of community members come forward without direct interference from us per se, and see with where they go. So I guess no.
So I'm seeing that the mover does not think it's a friendly amendment. I see Councillor Nowak shaking his head as well. Do you want to comment?
No, basically for the same reason as Councillor Harris. There's no sense in setting up this committee and then sort of tying their hands. But I think you're also tying the hands of staff when it comes to setting up the terms of reference as well, because you're eliminating things that they may want to put in. So I don't see it as a friendly amendment, no. So I wouldn't support that.
So Councillor Deutschmann, again, do you want to move your amendment now that you know it's not being seen as friendly?
Yeah, I'll move an amendment that, as part of the terms of reference, lifetime benefits will not be considered by this citizens committee.
Okay, so we're speaking to the amendment to the main motion. Councillor James, do you want to speak to that amendment? Oh, sorry. Is anyone going to second that amendment? Sorry. Seconded by Councillor Craig. Councillor James, did you want to speak to the amendment or hold your comments? Okay, and Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. Just something that was said, that when the motion came in November, the first option was, I don't know, there was three options. One was full benefit, one was half benefits, and one was that the councillors could pay the full amount but stay on the regional plan. And I believe Councillor Deutschman, sorry, I'm going to call you Rollman, stated that that option was available. Is that available now, that they can pay for the full plan?
So I would look to staff. It's slightly different. Kim, do you want to respond?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that is not available to them.
That's what I thought. So that's why it was offered in that previous motion. It was not offered to them to pay in the full plan. And so they won't,
if I just could add to that, they can purchase a plan and pay for it fully, but they can't.
They can't get on the regional plan.
They can't purchase everything that we currently have, is what for
Thank you.
clarification. I can?
Okay, so lots of background noise. I think we've gotten some clarification. Did everybody hear that?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So number one, post-service counselors who have retired from their position have the ability to purchase a benefit package that is offered by Sun Life that includes extended health, which is also dental, and life insurance. It is not the same package that is currently being offered to them.
Okay, so I see no further speakers. So on the amendment on the motion would be that it excludes lifetime benefits. That has been moved by Councillor Deutschman, seconded by Councillor Craig.
I had a comment.
So now Councillor James would like to weigh in. Go ahead.
I just want to say through you, Chair, thanks for bringing this back. I just want to speak a moment to being a newly elected councillor and the impact that this had in terms of making this decision and transparency with elected officials. So thank you for bringing it back. I do want to make a request when it comes to the Citizens Committee that there be a transparent process to council and how that committee is struck, so that we are aware of that process as it goes forward.
Thank you, Councillor James. We are right now voting on the amendment. So we've requested a recorded vote. The amendment is that there would be no consideration of lifetime benefits. Correct, Councillor Deutschman? Yes. Yes. Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. I'm just totally confused here. And that is sometimes my MO. But so if that amendment goes through, then if councillors choose to pay 100% of the benefits themselves with no cost to taxpayers, they won't be able to do it because it's not part of this.
So I would tell you that this is direction for a panel of citizen representatives that will consider this in the third year of this mandate for the next council. So it will not have an immediate impact. But what Councillor Deutschman and seconded by Councillor Craig is saying is that rather than just saying to this committee, and we can ask staff to clarify how they're chosen to Councillor James' concern, this would be off the table, and people have spoken for and against that. So this is an amendment to the main motion saying that lifetime benefits would never be considered in year 3 of this mandate for a future council. Does that clarify?
So we would be tying the hands of this committee that they cannot have any discussion on this and coming back in their report of their recommendations of future possibly 100% paid for benefits by Councillor?
That is correct.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to clarify that it's the 100% paid for lifetime benefits. If a councillor retires and chooses to purchase what they're able to purchase through this part-time employment, then they would get what they're able to get today. And that would still continue. This motion is not affecting any of that.
Okay, so Councillor Craig, is that your understanding? Okay, so it's only lifetime benefits that would be fully paid by the region.
Correct.
So good clarification. That is the amendment we are now voting on. And Councillor Deutschman has requested a recorded vote.
Regional Chair Redmond.
In favor.
Councillor Craig.
In favor?
Councillor Deutschman.
In favor.
Councillor Erb.
In favor.
Councillor Foxton.
Was the motion changed to specify paid for by the region?
Correct, yeah.
Because it's not here.
So the amendment was, as part of the terms of reference, 100% employer-paid lifetime benefits will not be
Thank you,
considered.
because that's not up here. Then I, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
In favor.
Councillor Hunick.
In favor.
Councillor James.
In favor.
Councillor Liggett.
In favor.
Councillor McCabe.
In favor.
Councillor Nowak.
Opposed.
Councillor Salonen.
In favor.
Councillor Shantz.
In favor.
Councillor Williams.
In favor.
Councillor Wolf.
In favor.
And I believe Councillor Verbanovic is not online. Okay, perfect. So that is carried.
Thank you, colleagues. So that is carried. So now we now have an amended motion, and this has been moved and seconded. Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, two other items arise from this issue that I just wanted to raise and had some concern about. The first is the lame duck issue and whether or not the original passing of this motion in the last term offended the lame duck rule because of, while in itself it didn't require a $50,000 investment, it had the potential of $50,000 or more if it had passed and continued. So an ongoing $50,000 obligation. So I have that concern, and I would like to hear back from perhaps Mr. Short, the clerk, to provide us with some information, further information on this issue, because during the debate, I recall the issue was raised several times, on two occasions, once by Councillor Verbanovic, and I forget by someone else, both experienced politicians who had some concern about whether this offended the lame duck rule or not, and it probably would have been helpful to have a paragraph on that in the original report. But the other thing that, and that was the only comment I was going to make, but the other comment that I wanted to make, and it ties a bit in with what Councillor James had said about the community outcry, understandably, about this motion. And it arises from the former councillor's statement that was provided to us, a very short paragraph, but in there was this comment that the benefit report that was reviewed on November 8th had been written for weeks, and several councillors had tried unsuccessfully to have the report tabled in public earlier. And I'm trying to understand why that would be, because we get a council package, we get all the information, the press gets the information in time, the community who is interested can see this information. And if the report had been out sooner, there would have been more public feedback on this issue and very well may not have had to come to this point today. And so I'm just curious why these councillors, who the 7 of them combined are probably in excess of 150 years of municipal council experience, raise that issue, and why that report, when they tried unsuccessfully, perhaps there is a reason why it hadn't come forward, and I'm just curious why.
So, Councillor Deutschman, those are all really good comments. We have just voted on the amendment. We still have to vote on the amended main motion, correct? So this isn't probably the juncture for that. Those are all relevant points. I have 3 other speakers, so this is the motion that is before us. If you want to make comments of a general nature, I will keep it till the end. Councillor James? You're good? Councillor Foxton?
Oh, we already spoke. I didn't know why that wasn't cleared.
Councillor Erb?
I don't want to speak.
You don't want to speak anymore? Okay. So I'm going to call the motion. Please use your buttons to vote. So colleagues, that is carried. I would suggest that some of the issues that have been raised by Councillor Deutschmann are good questions, and maybe we can ask for staff to bring a report back. And we can also outline the panel that would choose the citizen members. This isn't of an immediate nature, and I do appreciate the fact that staff are very busy with budget and a lot of other pressing time-sensitive issues, so we will not lose track of that, and we will have a report come back in the future. Mr. Lochner, we can do that? Okay, I see no further comments. I'll now start. Can we have a motion? I need a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, seconded by Councillor Craig. Please use your, I don't know what we call, I guess just press your buttons now. They're not icons anymore. It was more fun saying icon. That is carried, colleagues. We will take a very short break to set up for our next meeting.